Spokane, broadcasting here on KYRF Medical Lake Spokane, 88.1 and 92.3 FM, and streaming live on KYRS.org. My name is Paul Pataki, and I am joined, as always, by James McMillan in the studio, but I am getting feedback, James. See you another. The views expressed on SOS Spokane are those of the hosts and their guests and do not necessarily reflect those of KYRS or its underwriters. So, today we are going to, hopefully, we are getting over this hurdle of the technology and have a guest online, and let's all hope that this works out well. We have coming up soon here is Chris Armitage, and Chris is the candidate for the Democratic in the Democratic primary to run against Cathy McMorris Rodgers in Washington's 5th Congressional District. Our guest, Chris Armitage, again, is running for in the primary against fellow Democrat Dave Wilson for their party's nomination to face Cathy McMorris Rodgers to become the U.S. representative for Washington's 5th Congressional District. And we welcome Chris back to our program as our very first guest for months, since we've been having some technical difficulties bringing other people on. So thanks for coming on, Chris.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity to be here.
Okay, so we're right around the corner from the primary, and why don't we start out with why you feel this election is important and what you have to offer?
Well, this election represents a turning point about what we're going to determine our future to be. About the American public stepping up to say that we're not going to buy into the myth that our vote doesn't count. Several $1 billion will be spent this election cycle, already has, to try and convince people that their vote doesn't. So this is a turning point. This is an opportunity for us to use an obstacle as an opportunity. Use some of the most rampant corruption in U.S. history as an opportunity to identify and correct that path. For us to identify some of the greatest challenges, whether it's climate change or rampant poverty in the country, as opportunities to see those problems and decisively act, because the American public's engaged and we're ready for change.
Mm-hmm. And you have three main issues that on your website: climate justice, worker justice, and healthcare, under which you have included three issues that are pertinent to the header. So under climate justice, for example, you have the new Green Deal, Green Jobs Guarantee, and FEMA investments. Under worker justice, it's Income Justice Act, strengthen collective bargaining, and trade skills training. And under healthcare, Medicare for all, prescription drug reform, and veterans health. Speaking to your constituency, where have you, or what have you found that has resonated most with people in the 5th Congressional District?
The COVID crisis and so many other challenges that we're facing just make it more evident than ever that we need to get on the right track with healthcare, housing, and jobs in this country. Our healthcare system is incredibly damaging and predatory. The profit incentive doesn't solve every problem. When there's a profit-driven system, if it provides altruistic or beneficial results for the public, it has those results as an incident. They happen to coincide with making more money. But our current healthcare system, 60% of bankruptcies in this country come from medical debt. The turmoil, people I've met who lost their family business that they've had for generations, or their farm they've had for generations because their wife or husband gets cancer, that's something nobody should have to deal with. The idea that people have children who fall ill and they end up going bankrupt after losing a child. Anybody who isn't ready to take swift, decisive full measured actions to handle that is doing a disservice to the public. As far as jobs, this district in the last census, we had 11% unemployment across this district. Over a third of the population in some of our counties live under the poverty line. You go somewhere like Ponderay County, more than half the people who live there are on Social Security. Last year, we only had a 1% increase in our Social Security, or in people's Social Security they receive. We're doing a disservice to the American public by not having better health, better jobs, not just more jobs, better jobs with better pay. When I talked to my grandfather, he said that he was able to graduate high school, just high school education, enter a trade, make enough money to raise a family with a single income. That's not. We need to make sure that we're increasing Social Security so people on that can live with dignity, and people who are employed are not underemployed. You should be able, if you're working full-time, to have a work-life balance, have a safe account, and that's reasonable. That's a fair expectation for the public. And then housing. It's not right that there's people who work full-time jobs and still have to live with their parents because they can't afford to get a place to live. That wages are a reasonable thing to expect, that collectively, as a community, we can have higher wages. The power dynamic has shifted so aggressively, and a big part of correcting that is through supporting.
Mm-hmm. And you do have a challenge in the primary. His name is Dave Wilson. Could you talk a little bit about how your policy proposals differ from his, to give the voter an idea of issue differences?
Well, I'll also say we do a top 2 primary here in Washington, as some folks know, and so I'm also going against Kathy McMorris Rogers in the primary. I'm also going against Stephen Major in the primary. It's all in there, and so I try to be careful not to just run against one person other than our incumbent Kathy McMorris Rogers, and make the best case for why I'm the person to take that seat. Now, my experience, say, with a master's in Homeland Security, I specialized in disaster preparedness and emergency response. I believe I'm the most qualified person. Even beyond that, my lived experience as someone who has made minimum wage at the current rate, as someone who was often underinsured and uninsured as a child. These are experiences that I think increase someone's qualification for taking particularly an office in the House of Representatives. Dave Wilson is, if he has some policies listed on his website, I don't see strong commitments for the kind of full measures that we really need here, such as the policies I described. And I'm really proud to have the support of people like former candidate Joe Pacotis, who ran for this seat twice, former Spokane City Council President Ben Stuckert, sitting U.S. Congressman Ted Lieu, and a lot of the top unions in the state, like Teamsters, AFL-CIO, AFSCME, WFSE, they've thrown their support behind me as a candidate because they see that I'm the person who's going to fight for unions, quality employment, and health.
Mm-hmm. And James, do you have a question for us?
What are your thoughts on police reform here in Washington? I know a lot of it's going to be local, like each town and everything, but as a state, what kind of steps do you think we could take to come to terms? There was recently, I sent it to Paul, Spokane made it into the top 5 on a list, but it was for shootings of individuals per capita, and we are top 5 in the nation, according to this information. And I think it's a serious problem. I think it's been a serious problem for a long time. And I'm glad it's getting the attention it deserves, but I get worried that it'll blow over. Like Black Lives Matter was headline news for a year and a half or so, 2 years, and then it didn't really get talked about for quite a while, and it took more people dying, back to back, before it was people were outraged enough to be back out on the streets.
Just so you know, Chris, what he's talking about is Mapping Police Violence. It is a website. It's mappingpoliceviolence.org/cities, and on it, they filter the city violent crime rate, and they also look at the police killings. And indeed, according to this, we do rate pretty high up on, for example, it looks like we are at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, fifth, filtering by city violence amongst all police departments across the United States?
So, I think it's really important to address police as a constitutional candidate in many ways, which might be something that surprises people. But the fact is, when a law enforcement officer takes someone's life, that they have denied that person their constitutional rights of a trial by a jury of their peers, due process, and they've been killed through cruel and unusual punishment. So no court in the land would sentence someone to death via knee on the neck. We need a reactive policing force. We need a national oversight authority that polices the police but is not the police and is publicly accountable, with full access to granting licensing for people to become police officers and rescinding that licensing, similar to the American Bar Association in that respect. Anyone who has a domestic violence conviction should be allowed to be a law enforcement officer as well. I actually performed some law enforcement duties while active duty Air Force as military police. And the fact is, as long as we have things like the war on drugs, we still have a system that is not going to be corrected by any amount of sensitivity training or community policing. Those half measures aren't going to resolve what we're facing. The militarization of the police is a direct, and I say this as someone who performed law enforcement duties, the militarization of police is a direct effect of two main things. One, the corruption in our government, because a lot of people are getting money on the back end or just helping out their friends, getting these corrupt politicians so that they can line their pockets. And then also the war on drugs creates an escalating arms race where we, the people, are the enemy. It's the military mindset. I did soldiering when I was deployed, and I did some law enforcement and 911 operator work when I was stateside. And what I saw was our current system creates an environment where law enforcement officers see themselves as soldiers in enemy territory, and anyone can be the enemy. Instead of that being their community for them to care for, it's anyone can shoot me at any second. They would literally show us videos before we went out on shift of people getting gunned down at traffic stops. Horrifically. They said, you want to go home to your family, you better be ready to pull your gun. That's not a healthy environment. That's not something that's going to actually provide benefit to the community. Essentially an environment where people go out and have an adversarial mindset. Right now, law enforcement officers get protected doing things, like I said, rescinding people, taking away people's constitutional rights, and it needs to end, and we need to act decisively.
Okay, so in terms of the candidates that are running, obviously Kathy McMorris Rogers is not only the incumbent, but she has an enormous war chest, and everyone knows who she is. Should you come out of the primary in the top two, how are you fashioning your campaign to overcome the vast differences, number one, in the campaign coffers, and also can you illustrate for us precisely what reason we have to remove Kathy from office and to have you be our representative for the 5th Congressional District?
I'll start by saying that Michael Bloomberg spent $500 million in the span of a few months and didn't make much progress at all in the Democratic because the public is actually paying more attention than ever, and buying ad space and hiring a lot of staff isn't going to be what does it. Further, the last 6 elections that Kathy McMorris Rogers had, she performed 1% to 4% worse every single time without fail. That's someone who's on their way out the door, not someone who's gaining support in the community. It's a clear demonstration that the more people learn about the decisions that my opponent makes to cut SNAP benefits, to create upside down tax bills like tax code like we currently have, where the working class are paying more than the wealthy. People are paying attention, denying pre-existing coverage to people, funding just wars all over the world while denying us opportunity here in the United States. People aren't okay with it. Kathy McMorris Rogers needs to be fired for selling out the American public at every, because if she does something good for our community, it's only incidental to making her donors happy. High dollar donors, corporations. Now on the technology committee, Microsoft and Google are loading her coffers as well, and people are ready to fire someone who has consistently served themselves and hire someone such as myself, who knows what service before self means, that serving the public and taking care of your community comes from.
And this administration in Washington, D.C., has done everything it can to not address issues on everything from obviously healthcare and COVID-19 across the board, laying the blame for anything that might happen on the local governance units. And so my question is this: bearing in mind that it's local municipalities that develop their own homelessness and housing priorities, do you envision, once you get to Congress, to address these on a national level, homelessness and housing?
The federal government has done a disservice through inaction to our local communities. The fact is, right now, you talk about police violence. 20% of people who live on the streets have schizophrenia. Those are very often the folks who need treatment and end up getting killed by law enforcement officers who are just not trained to be able to handle someone who's in the middle of, say, a schizophrenic episode. And 1 out of 5 people with schizophrenia. How are we going to deal with that? We're going to address it at the federal level. We need to fix our healthcare situation. People need to be able to receive treatment. I know too many people who avoid going to the doctor for things that they really need treatment for. And it has damaging effects that echo throughout the rest of our society. The same goes for these are things that are being kicked. The can is being kicked. It's being pushed down to local and city and state governments that should be able to expect that these United States, States United, should be able to address some of these shared problems together. And so, like I said, universal health care and ensuring quality employment, union growth, so that people can actually collectively bargain and have a voice when it comes to how their companies run, so that stakeholders have a voice, not just shareholders. That's how we're going to be able to address. I'm going to be able to address these problems once elected and sitting in the U.S. House of Representatives. So I'm going to be there for our.
Okay, so here we are with Chris Armitage, who is again running for Congress in the 5th Congressional District. So, Chris, the new Green Deal, which you support, how would it benefit folks here in the 5th Congressional District?
Sure. Well, the Green New Deal, it's just a 14-page resolution drafted with the help of a group called the Sunrise Movement, which I'm a member of youth climate activists. And it's just 14 pages. A lot of those are just providing evidence that climate change is a legitimate threat that we're facing. One of my favorite expressions is the obstacle is the way. Here in the 5th District, we need more jobs, we need better paying jobs. We need to be able to provide a high quality of life for people. Having traveled to over 25 towns in this district, 25 towns, I'll say again, and held over 100 campaign events in those towns, I've heard a lot of people's different perspectives, including a lot of people who say, absolutely, I want clean air and water in 10 years, but I also want to make sure I have a paycheck now to feed my children. And those don't have to be those don't have to be opposed. They don't have to be opposites. And so by encouraging small business, creating more competition, creating a green economy, we have a lot of opportunity. There's people who say that we left the Great Depression because of the New Deal. There's people who say we left it because of World War II. It's probably somewhere in between. But what happened there, what grew our economy to where it is today, that we're still riding off of the benefits of, is because whether you're building a bomb or a solar panel, that's a quality job for a person, although one of those allows for more self-sufficiency as a nation, more independence as a nation, less reliance on other countries, and puts people into quality jobs where they can, say, raise a family and actually get to spend time with their children, the next generation. That's an important job. So by addressing the problem of climate change, bringing new jobs to Eastern Washington, we're able to create more opportunity for people.
Mm-hmm.
That's the Green New Deal. Actually, I also have a proposal within that because we built the Green New Deal. It's a resolution. There aren't a lot of specifics on purpose. We actually held a Green New Deal forum in Walla Walla. A lot of farmers came out from the Walla Walla Valley, and I answered a lot of questions. And what I said is we get to build this together as a community. So what are the things we need to address? And that room for collaboration is incredible. One idea that's been brought up that I really like is the idea, we have about 80,000 wild horses in this country, the Bureau of Land Management handles, and I want to help create something called the American Horse Corps, where we employ tens of thousands of Americans on horseback with reasonable hours and good pay to be able to be stewards of our environment, whether that's helping with rebuild, riparian buffers, or nurturing local wildlife populations. And that's a way where we create good jobs and make a better community and a better future.
Mm-hmm. And James, did you have a question?
No, not specific to that. No.
Okay, and well, we have been going through a period of time here in this part of the country where more and more of right-wing militias are showing themselves at, for example, at the local Spokane Black Lives Matter demonstrations. We've seen some of the Boogaloo Boys, but there's also Act for America, there's Independent History and Research, there's Proud Boys, Truth and Love Project. This has been a hotbed for right-wing groups for a very long time. Brother of Nathaniel Foundation, the Lordship Church, the Our Place Fellowship. In the context of today's political atmosphere, wherein everything is truly up for grabs. We don't know, for example, what will happen next week. We don't know what will happen today in regards to COVID-19. And we have a very divisive media landscape that is in some ways encouraging the development of these groups. How do you see your voice on this issue, in terms of legislation in D.C.?
I'll say that I think it's important to support the rights even of people we disagree with, and that's not a fun answer. It's not an answer that stirs up, partisan support, some of the easiest support to get. But we do have to defend the rights of people we disagree with. When I was in the service, it wasn't about just protecting the good people in America or the people who have honest and sincere intentions to better their communities. I think that a lot of the strife that we're seeing and a lot of the negative behavior that we're seeing is a result of turmoil in this country, a sickness in this country, a cancer in this country, a cancer of the kind of greed and corruption that has degraded people's lives in incredible and horrific ways. And I think that a lot of those behaviors among those groups are outcroppings or results of people who have been seriously wronged by our current systems and are looking for someone to blame. And so I'm going to help improve this situation by making sure that we have quality healthcare, housing, and jobs in this country, and rights are protected and defended, including their rights to be able to be safe, their right to life. If that's one of the most important things I mention is I like to talk about is for all the jurisprudence over the course of U.S. history, your pursuit of happiness is absolutely allowed as long as it doesn't infringe on my liberties, and your liberties are absolutely allowed as long as they don't infringe on my right to live. And so it's not an easy answer, it's not a simple answer, but it starts to, if we don't solve bigger problems that are causing this toxicity in our society, then we're really just treating symptoms.
Okay. That said, the Southern Poverty Law Center, on its site for the hate groups, shows that in year 2000, there were 12 hate groups in Washington, or groups that they have pronounced as hate groups. 12 in 2000. 20 years later, or 19 years later, actually, in 2019, there are 30. So while I appreciate, and I will step up for this Second Amendment with anyone, it does seem to be a worrying trend that we are becoming more hateful, more divided than we have been in the past. So my question for you is, by honoring anyone's perspective and allowing, and we must allow freedom of speech, how do you counteract when you have groups of people who express that the only way to change the system is through violence?
I mean, that's just where our laws come into play. You know, it's not just about the Second Amendment. I wish we defended every amendment as aggressively as the Second Amendment is supported right to speech, free speech, right to freedom of assembly, and like I said, these are outcroppings of a nation in disrepair. So many things have been going wrong in this country, and this is a common thing historically, that hate groups thrive when people aren't doing well, and authoritarian leaders give them someone to hate. We fight this not by taking away people's constitutional rights, but by making a better community for everyone.
Mm-hmm. And how do you do that?
Healthcare, housing, and jobs. I mean, I support discrimination protections, of course. People shouldn't be denied employment and other opportunities and service based on their race or sex or gender or religion. But we have to solve larger societal problems. We're just looking at symptoms. We have to go upstream from things like these organizations. They commit illegal acts if they do things that hurt people, if they violate other people's opportunities for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, then they should be dealt with legally.
Mm-hmm. And what about the small businesses here in your district? Unlike the major corporations, it seems that we're going to find a shakeout, already have, for that matter, of small businesses who have gone under because of the fact that COVID-19 has hit, and it looks like we're going to, even in Washington State, that we're experiencing an uptick. But across the country, I suspect that when this thing finally plays out, that a much higher percentage of small businesses, of true small mom and pop businesses, are going to go under. And I think the same thing is going to hold true here in Spokane. How will we dig ourselves out of this in the aftermath of coronavirus?
Well, the thing is, when you look at pharmaceutical companies having profits, how many of the largest businesses are performing better than ever financially, that's because they want mom and pop businesses going out of business. They want small farms going out of business. That benefits them. And that's why I tell people a free market's great, a competitive market's great. We should aim for that. That's not the same thing as a laissez-faire market. That's not the same thing as a market where we are completely hands-off. We, the public, are completely hands-off from taking actions that allow small businesses to thrive, for the best ideas to thrive. And so, when we look at the telecommunications companies, that's a cartel protected by the U.S. government. If we want to help small businesses after this, we need to make sure that good ideas and good work ethic are able to thrive in this environment. And so we need to break up all these monopolies. We need to break up these government-supported cartels and duopolies so that small businesses have opportunity. And also healthcare comes back to that as well, because so many people have these great ideas and are ready to start businesses, but they can't because then their kids wouldn't have insurance, or they wouldn't have insurance. So
Kathy McMorris Rogers, infamous for her lack of public gatherings, i.e. Town hall meetings and such. How responsive and in what types of ways would you, as a representative in the House of Representatives for this district, be different in terms of listening to your constituency?
Well, I think part of how I've run this race is by showing people what our representation can really look like. Like I said, I've visited 25 towns in this district. I had the chance to speak to Heather Foley a few times, Tom Foley's widow, and that's how she said he won places like Lincoln County that are traditionally Republican county. Because he went there, he spent time with people, and it's not just about being on the stage and holding forums and Q&As, which I intend to do and have done already, but it's also about just being present in the community, and not just for parades. People should see their representative out on the street. They should be accessible. They should be picking up the phone. And once elected, my goal is to be the most accessible representative in the entire country, to continue to travel up and down this district, not for the purpose of getting reelected, but for the purpose of being informed on how the lives of our residents in our counties in Eastern Washington are going.
And how about environmental issues here? I know that the Trump administration has loosened restrictions on what can go into waterways, and there are problems with water in the West Plains, specifically by the Air Force Base, and we're a growing area, so we have we're expecting more and more people to be moving into the area, which puts demands upon the infrastructure, water systems, and we have wildfires that thankfully did not occur last year, but the previous 2 years it was absolutely terrible. We have an ongoing environmental disaster that is unfolding before our very eyes in the midst of the COVID-19 happening, and in the midst of examining through Black Lives Matter our relationship to the police force and the military, and we have an economic collapse. We've been losing jobs. Just today, nationally 1.3 million people filed for employment. And so I know that it's kind of like whack-a-mole right now, and probably will be for quite some time. But in regards to specific problems that we're having with, say, the Spokane River and what could potentially happen with it, with pollutants being allowed to once again race free in the Spokane River, what is your stance on that? What do you anticipate backing any legislation to roll back to make EPA do its actual job and to protect the water and the air quality here in the 5th District?
Oh, it's interesting. A lot of people forget that Nixon actually was the president who created the Environmental Protection Agency, a Republican president. And we have a duty to keep our air and our water clean. I look at the legacy of people like Teddy Roosevelt, who understood that to be a conservative isn't just to conserve capital, it's also to conserve our environment, our land, our community, the air we breathe, the water we drink. Right now they're being polluted by folks who aren't going to have to deal with the consequences because they've made enough profit off of polluting that they can just buy their way out of the problems the rest of us are going to face. I spoke to a tribal member, a Colville tribe member recently, named Kurt, and he was telling me that, like I mentioned before, people say, what do I care about clean air and water in 10 years if I can't feed my family now? And he said their mindset is the opposite. Why, if I can't breathe air and water in 10 years, then what good is the paycheck today that keeps me going now? We need to have a long-term mindset. We need to protect our environment. And for those who say that the Environmental Protection Agency is having regulations to keep our air and water is something we need. That didn't work out well in the 19th century. That economy was pretty hands-off, and we had robber barons and monopolies, vertical monopolies and horizontal monopolies, and a terribly polluted environment that many people are struggling. We can do better, and in Congress, I'm going to fight so that we have clean air and water at every step. It's not going to be about profits. It's going to be about improving the lives of of working class Americans, every American, because there's more ways to improve someone's life besides putting money in the pockets of the most wealthy and the most.
Mm-hmm. And while this is a state issue, I'd like to get your thoughts on it. The economic inequities in Washington State, in particular, can, for a good part, be attributed to the fact that we have an upside-down tax structure. And I know that, again, this is something that goes through the state legislature and not through Congress. But would you be supportive of a state income tax that would be more progressive and would be fairer frankly, and perhaps could help out in terms of having money available for environmental needs for schools and for the homelessness, housing, and everything across the board. Again, would you be supportive of a state income tax?
The important distinction to make there is that people understand with a progressive income tax, you're only paying a higher rate on the money above a certain amount. I don't want people who make less than $50,000 a year, $75,000 a year even, paying any of their income into a tax like that if it was created. The people I want paying are paying the tax on what they make over $50,000, what they make over $75,000, what they make over $100,000. Make over $5 million, and so as long as it's very clear that it's not going to have any negative impact on the lives of working Americans, then that's something I'd be supportive of. Yeah.
Okay, great. James, do you have any other questions?
If you're not to win, do you plan on continuing to run for this seat and try to get into office in Washington? Or do you think you might look at other offices?
That's an interesting question. I mean, not to go too. I don't know. I'm a first-time candidate. 9 out of 10 of the people elected to the House of Representatives last cycle were also first-time candidates. I don't think anybody should really want to be a career politician. That should almost be disqualifying. and so, I think a lot of people would agree with me. That's why I support term limits. So it's really just the kind of thing you have to. I hate to give, this kind of an answer, but it's the truth. I've seen it firsthand. You have to see how things play out, and where the most opportunity to do good for your community.
No, and that's fair for sure. That's a fair answer.
And so, where do you go from here? According to your countdown to the 2020 Washington primary, you have 26 days, 10 hours, 27 seconds. What are you doing for that period of time?
Well, our campaigns reached out to over 150,000 voters. I've personally, last month, I made over 2,000 calls, phone calls. So that's part of our outreach. We have several billboards up. We've got great support, like I said, from a lot of different organizations that are letting their membership know that we really do have an alternative here. My time is going to be spent reaching out to voters and letting people know that we have a real choice here, and this is an opportunity. Obstacle is the way.
So why don't you let us know who has endorsed you, what organizations?
Sure. So U.S. Congressman Ted Lieu, former Spokane City Council President Ben Stucker, City Council Member Kate Burke, Walla Walla City Council Member Riley Clubb, Pullman City Council Member Daniel Receipts Goldthwait, former 5th CD candidate Joe Pacotis, AFSCME WFSE, which is the largest Washington Federation of State Employees, largest single union in the state, Teamsters Joint Council 28, LIUNA, AFL-CIO, which is the largest organization combined unions, presidential candidate Marianne Williamson, and just Spokane County Democrats, the Walla Walla County Democrats, the Pend Oreille County Democrats, the 4th and 6th Legislative District Democrats, and just a bunch of other really amazing people who I really appreciate, because we only do this by building a coalition. Even Tanner Rowe, who hosts a podcast here in Spokane, he's a libertarian-leaning gentleman. I'm friends with a lot of libertarian folks who are supporting this campaign. And that's because they recognize that you actually, if you're going to build a big tent, be about it, sit at the table with people where they're at.
And are you currently looking for volunteers?
Volunteers are always great, absolutely. We have a volunteer sign up on our website, armitageforcongress.com. Of course, if people can donate too, we don't take corporate contributions, period. And so our campaign's fueled by $25 donations. That's how we pay for everything. We have over 1,000 signs across this district in 25 different towns, 5 billboards, thousands of dollars spent on social media, and it's all because of people chipping in $25, $50.
Uh-huh. And where would folks go to get additional information?
ArmitageForCongress.com is the best resource for that. Although also if you check out YouTube, I love doing interviews and talking to people. And so I'd also say check that out, and just Google Chris Armitage or Armitage for Congress. So we've done a lot more. Our website's good, but we've done a lot more interviews and articles and those sorts of things that are really accessible and easily available for people to learn more about.
Well, Chris Armitage, thanks so much for being on the show today. We have run out of time, and Chris Armitage is running in the primary for the as a Democrat for the U.S. Representative for Washington's 5th Congressional District. Again, thanks so much for coming on, Chris, and keep in touch.
Absolutely. Thank you both for having me, and take care.
Yeah, you too, Chris, and good luck.
Appreciate it.
This is SOS Spokane on KYRS Radio 88 and 92.3, and I'd like to thank all our listeners for tuning in. We hope you join us again next week, and until then, I urge all of us to research, question, verify, and act on truth and justice. Stay informed and stay healthy. Bye-bye.